Welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds. So glad you can join us. Stars with a big overtime win. And of course, we're going to bring on one of our Spits and Suds besties. That's what we're going to refer to him as. You can read his article upcoming in D Magazine, which we're going to talk about. And also you can subscribe to his Substack, which is Stars Stack. And you can follow him online. The greatness of @David Castillo. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. You called me a bestie. I feel like that's the first time you called me a bestie. I don't know what distinguishes a bestie from a frosty, but I really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, frosty is a Canadian beverage, or a beverage that hockey. And Mayor Bear, one of our Spits and Suds listeners, shout out to Mayor Bear. Still waiting for my friendship bracelet that you make for other Stars fans, but I digress, and you should make one for David as well. Mayor Bear pointed out that maybe I should call listeners Sudsies. What do you think?
I think you are coming dangerously close to sounding like a hockey player who just sort of shorten every word.
I do.
To make it more friendly and courteous, which I think in some ways is great. However, for pretentious people like me that kind of want words to mean things, I'm not sure I'm on board with that.
It's interesting because I would have the name Spitzy, and I can't think of probably Casty.
You see what I mean? Those are awful. Those are god awful.
They're not awful. What do you mean they're awful? Casty's great, man. Casty played well tonight. That sounds good. No?
It sounds convenient. It does not sound good.
I think Spitzy's a cool name.
But Spitzy, it definitely sounds like somebody from The Sopranos.
Yeah. Well, that was my nickname given to me by Mr. Ritzkovian of the Texas Stars and also the Dallas Stars. So therefore, I feel very nice. He said that, yep, that's what I would call you. So there you go. All right, Casty, let's get into the game last night and talk about this thing. So before we and today, just to let you know, we're going to talk about the game real quick, but then we're going to get into something that David's really, really good at, and that's talking about Stars' young prospects, many of whom you probably haven't heard of. And that's why I wanted to bring David on to talk about these players, to get you excited about Stars hockey and some of the prospects that are coming up. Usually we talk about prospects when they're at the AHL level. And we do that with Steven Meserve of 100 Degree Hockey, and he's terrific about that. But David's going to really dig deep into some of the players that the Stars control that are in juniors. But first, let's go into the game last night. David, I always say, like, there are bad matchups and there are good matchups. And I think this year Winnipeg's a bad matchup, and I would add Anaheim to that list. When you look at the 3-game sum, I think that Anaheim gives the Stars trouble. But that said, obviously penalties were an issue in the last 2 games. And the other thing is, I just didn't think the passing was very crisp last night. But all that said, a veteran team coming out with 2 quality points at this juncture in the season, to me, against a team that had beaten you 2 straight prior, that's a good win.
I don't know about like good win. You can always, like, a win's a win, right? Like, I think that's kind of how you can like sort of further reduce that. This is something. So I agree about like, to me, Anaheim, when I look at their blue line, and like there are very few teams who have been better at drafting defensemen than the Ducks. Like, you go back all the way to when they drafted Shea Theodore, Josh Manson, Brandon Montour. I feel like the list is endless. And now you have guys like Jackson Lacombe, Minyakov, and so forth. And to me, like, I think Anaheim the foundation is there for a playoff team. I would argue the foundation is there for a playoff team even now. But I think the coaching is lacking. And they have a few sort of like flaws, but for the most part, it's not really surprising. I mean, like, Anaheim has the best goaltending duo in the entire NHL. So even a bad Anaheim team can just not be an auto win for good teams simply by virtue of having that sort of kind of Hasek-esque bar that every offense needs to cross. So I think it's a decent win. It's just something I talked about in or something I wrote about in D Magazine today about whether or not Dallas can win a playoff round without Heiskanen. which is that as long as Heiskanen is injured, like Dallas is just never going to be Dallas. And I think there are a lot of things we can say about Heiskanen in terms of like, well, whether or not he should be quarterback in the top unit, which of course he should not be. Harley's been brilliant. But as a shift, in terms of shift to shift value, you've really seen in these last, not just the loss to Edmonton and Winnipeg and Colorado, but I think even with the game against Anaheim, Dallas has to be they have to be a rough style team. I'm talking about Lindy Ruff, of course, where they have to be able to outscore their problems right now without
Right.
Heiskanen because Heiskanen will always be a shutdown defender first and foremost, and that's why we complain about his lack of offensive ceiling.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is the lack of hits last night and any kind of I don't know. I mean, if a team is that fast, one way to slow them down is through some physicality and deep forechecks. And I just didn't see. There's just a lot of open ice by both teams and a lot of odd man rushes based on turnovers. And it was just a tough game to watch. I know if you're sitting in the stands, it kind of had everything. Some big saves by both goalies at times. Lots of penalties. It's just, but I just said good points because easily you could have chalked that up to a loss. But, just like on Sunday, would you have liked to come out of Colorado with 2 points? Sure. But you got a point. And that point could be the difference between home field and the home ice in the first round or going on the road in Colorado.
Yeah, and I don't think, hopefully I'm not sounding like kind of like too sort of critical or like eager to engage in semantics or anything like that. I think it's just, I feel like, I guess because of so much of the discourse, especially around Ottinger lately, I feel like what gets lost in a lot of this discussion is that Dallas doesn't have a good defense without Heiskanen. It's not even a not good defense. It's a bad defense. But the broadcast is always talking about goals against, goals against. Oh, they're great at goals against. No, they're an elite PK team. They don't get scored on the penalty kill, which is great. However, they let in tons of shots at even strength, tons of shot attempts in terms of shot quality. They're like bottom 10. To me, it's just important to like kind of accept those expectations, and hopefully that kind of maybe like allows people to kind of adjust how they analyze the games of Ottinger and DeSmith, who really are having to work a lot harder now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, someone was asking me in the office today. I said, "What about Jake Ottinger? Is he kind of falling?" And I'm like, "No." I said, "Let's look at the goals last night. The first, to me, there's one that probably it slipped through his pads and it was deemed goaltender interference and then overturned. But the first goal, you cannot, a lot of times as a goaltender, like you're going one way and the tip is another. And the Anaheim tip last night, where the shot purposely was outside of the goaltender crease and then tipped back toward Ottinger or back toward the goal, to me was an unbelievably talented, and that's something I think a lot of teams will try to do in the future because you're not putting a shot on net, and it's very tough to defend that because you have the positioning. You just have to stick your take your stick and put it beyond the net and then just tip it back. So I look at that, and then whether or not it should be a penalty shot, I didn't think it should be. But that said, Leo Carlsson with an unbelievable move. So that's 2 of the 3 Anaheim goals. So, and then Ottinger made a big save in the third period to really preserve the game. So,
by the way, I know.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, real quick. I was just because I know fans have a hard time just inherently giving credit to other teams. The puck handling on that Carlson penalty shot was just some of the sickest I've ever seen. And that guy, as I've been saying, if he gets like a great strength and conditioning coach, he's a 100-point player, like consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They are a team that is up and coming, and we'll see. I mean, we thought of that about Buffalo as well. I mean, Buffalo's got a lot of talent. Ottawa has finally put it together, but look what Ottawa did. They went out and got a top goalie, and now they're in the playoff race. So, all right. So let's move now to something that David does really well, and that's, among other things, and that's the prospect pool. And there are a lot of prospects that you might not have heard of, but it's interesting. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is based on the recent trades. And the Stars have had such success, not just in drafting, but the development of players so fast. Wyatt Johnston, way too fast to get to the NHL. Amazing. Logan Stankoven, same. Maverick Bourque, same. Liam Bichel, same. Jake Ottinger went back down, but it was still a quick development from Boston University to Texas to, making the squad. Jason Robertson, same. So there were a lot of players that came up real quick through the system. And, I know Stars fans because we're used to it, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years to come up. So let's talk about some of the rankings. And at the top of your rankings, we're going to go to the Ontario Hockey League. And two things. First, when we get started, David, I wanted to ask you because I love looking at prospects. And before we get into specific stars, do you take into account that it's junior hockey and there's so much open ice to roam? Do you look at those? Because sometimes I see players in juniors and they look absolutely amazing, and then they get to the AHL and they're stifled.
Well, that's always been the biggest thing, right? Whenever it comes to projecting prospects, which is it's the thing that you listen to kind of anybody that talks, like whether it's professional scouts, whether it's people doing public work like Scott Wheeler, Will from Scouchin, et cetera, which is pace. That's the biggest shift. It's one of the reasons why you'll even see prospects struggle in the AHL, because the AHL, while it is not necessarily the most talented league, it does have something resembling an NHL pace. You even saw like someone like Rupa Hintz, right, kind of struggled with being productive down there in the AHL. And so with a lot of with junior hockey, that's always the biggest thing. Pace is just simply much slower. You don't have you don't really have necessarily like the systems in place that establish the kind of rules of engagement, and making sure that players are comfortable along the walls, for example, like it is at the NHL level, where a lot of it's just wall work and trenches and just grit, grime, and grease, right? And so with junior hockey, you just simply don't have that pace. What you have is just a kind of a small kind of like group of extremely talented players that tend to have their own gravity, and that's what propels the kind of best teams to be successful, which is they have like a Gavin McKenna or a Macklin Celebrini and so forth.
Yep.
And so yeah, pace is really just the big, and I would argue like only thing.
Yeah, and I'm also fascinated by the decision now of players whether or not to go junior route or go to the NCAA, because probably over the last 5 to 10 years, the NCAA has picked up so much steam as far as how good college hockey is. But a team that's fascinating to watch in the juniors, because they have a few stars, is the Barrie Colts, and they're of the Ontario Hockey League. And that's your number one prospect, Tristan Bertucci. Nice size at 6'2", a defenseman. Tell us about Bertucci. He was a pretty high draft pick for the Stars, and what you like about him.
It's Bertucci is another, like, I feel like this is going to be the case of a lot of picks with Dallas, beyond like the Johnston, Stankovens, and Borks of the world, which is that like the player, didn't like the pick. And so Bertucci is definitely a player that's had to grow on me, because I didn't necessarily see what the ceiling was for this player. And now you're really seeing it, which is that Bertucci was kind of drafted as sort of like I'm trying to think of like a good NHL comparable, but kind of drafted as one of these hybrid shutdown defenders, right? He's a really, if you want, like, to me, Bertucci is kind of worth the price of admission alone just to watch his skating. He's just liquid in all three zones, but it's kind of in some ways it's funny because kind of the issue that a lot of people have with Heiskanen, where it's like, you see how talented he is, how quick he moves, and you're like, why can't he put up more points? Bertucci doesn't necessarily have that top speed or anything like that, but he does have genuine blue chip talent when it comes to skating. And so sometimes you kind of see that with Bertucci as well, where it's like, man, how this guy isn't scoring like 50, 60 points in the OHL. And he kind of like almost sort of got there this year. Granted, an injury took him out basically for the regular season. He's going to end up probably only registering 50 games. But he really kind of he for one plays on the top power play unit when he was healthy and the top penalty PK unit, and it's easy to see why he's just so mature in the defensive zone, moving the puck. Even if he doesn't necessarily have like creative skill, he has functional skill in the offensive zone. But where he really excels is transition and facilitating the puck up ice. And I think certain things that were kind of there early on weren't there as consistently, and it's one of the reasons why he's the assistant captain, why the coaches love him, which is that he's just kind of does everything and does everything extremely well. It's very easy to envision someone like Bertucci on like a bottom pair in Dallas, in the future.
His teammate, Emil Hemming, was the Stars' top first round draft pick last year, and a bit of controversy because there were some players around Hemming that I know you thought that the Stars should pick instead. The Finnish player wanted to come and play in North American juniors to get adjusted to the game. And I don't want to call it a slow start, but he has certainly picked up steam in the second half and playing much better. So what have you seen out of Hemming's game and the improvement as he gets adjusted to the North American style and game?
It's tough, man. I have a hard time talking about Hemming without sounding kind of negative or overly critical. Because yeah, you were talking about players, right, that were picked after him. I was on Twitter screaming Igor Chernyshov, who played in Russia, transitioned. I think most people had him in the first round, and sure enough, Chernyshov is actually, if he had been healthy, Chernyshov would have been on pace for 148 points in his post-draft year. That's actually more than Wyatt Johnston in his post-draft year. Same leagues, OHL. So yes, I have a bone to pick with the scouting staff. But at the same time, again, like I want to accept that, hey, this is who they picked. Is he any good? Does he have a future? And is he, a projectable NHL player? I think the first thing that's important for people to kind of realize is that Hemming's production really is just bad. Like there's no way, there's no reason to sugarcoat it. Like it's not. He has 47 points right now in 59 games. Remi Ellie, who was of course also a second, or I'm sorry, not also, but a second round pick many years ago. We probably all remember him. He was over a point per game in his post draft year. And I don't think anybody would think of Remi Ellie as this like slick, dynamic winger. So Hemming's production really is bad. And yes, Barrie has been an anemic offensive team, but they are a really good team. So Hemming's production is a red flag. However, watching him, it's easy to see how Dallas kind of, got intoxicated by his skills. Again, he has a pro ready frame. He's 6'2", almost 190 pounds. And one of the things that I feel like I noticed throughout the year is something that I had been saying at the Substack, which is, you know what, transition to North America. I'm not going to look at his first half like that's a real assessment. I'm going to look at his second half, kind of like you mentioned. And he was much better in the second half. Excuse me. Not only better in the second half, but it was quite evident to me, or has been evident to at least these amateur eyes, that Hemming was sacrificing the development of his shooting, which we already know he's good at the cost of trying to develop other parts of his game, like his playmaking, like his play processing. Even his skating looked like a little bit better. He's a player that already has, solid foot speed. He's not an afterburner or anything like that. But, for a guy that's 6'2", he moves quick, plays quick. And so I think what I've seen on the ice still gives me a lot of room for optimism, no matter how much, you hear me complain about who was picked after him that I think should have been picked.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm just, I'm hoping for the best. I I'm interested to see how much influence Yuri Lettinen had on this pick, or if it was just the European scouting. I mean, they do love their Finns. So it is fascinating. I thought he looked actually pretty good in the preseason when he played, but development's interesting, and taking it to the AHL is a different level. I am glad that he has looked better, but I think we also have to remember, and although the styles of European and, let's say, Soviet hockey have certainly gelled more towards the North American game, there still is a difference, and there's a difference between being in a new land and finding yourself, and so there's just a lot to get adjusted to. So hopefully he continues that adjustment on the upswing. For your third prospect, you have Ayrton Martino from Clarkston in the NCAA. Interesting wing prospect for the Stars.
Yeah, so Martino, I think I don't know if anybody like heard me talking about this stat. I actually don't think I mentioned it on social media, but I wrote about it at the Substack, which is that Martino has not gone all of March without a point. Actually, I take that back. In the at least in the quarterfinals, right, that he just played against Harvard, which they won, he had 4 points in 3 games in the ECAC quarterfinals. Prior to that, did not go a single game in the month of March without a point. And so there was just like so much to like about Martino, the player that I think people again, I hate comps, right? Because even identical twins were extremely different hockey players, right? Of course, talking about the Sedins, right? So as much as I despise comps, I realize like for the purpose of a casual conversation, it kind of helps to kind of help, especially people that don't follow prospects, visualize kind of what this player might be like. And he reminds me a lot of Maverick Bork. Really good on the forecheck, really good playmaker, and like Bork with the like last season in the AHL, right? Bork's calling card was playmaking, but really, really developed. Granted, he'd always scored a lot of goals, but scoring goals in juniors, especially in the Q versus scoring goals in the AHL, very different. And that's exactly what happened with Martino. Like until this season, Martino's previous high in goals was 9. This year he has 24, right? So in addition to the fact that he still has the playmaking chops, and it's just been the reason for why Clarkson University has been like a decent team. And so there's just a lot to like. And granted, he's still unsigned, right? So that's really important to point out. But there's just a lot to like about his game because his game really look kind of smell. He passes the sniff test when it comes to maturity in a prospect, how well they read the game, how well whether or not they can adjust to pace of play. And I think whenever a player has that intelligence and that spatial awareness, these tend to bode well in terms of kind of moving on up to the higher levels.
At number 4 is the 2023 fourth round pick by Dallas on a very good Boston College Hockey East squad. He also played for Team USA in the World Juniors, Aram Menidian.
So you were selling Boston College short, by the way, with the very good. No, this is Boston College. I mean,
they're great.
James Hoggins.
Hockey East is all great.
Yeah, true. He's on an absolutely stacked team. James Hoggins is going to go top 3, or certainly should go top 3 in this upcoming draft. Ryan Leonard, brilliant Washington pick. Teddy Stiga, a lot of other names, and Menedian is a player that I think he's sort of I've always been high on him. This is a pick that I really did love at the time, and the thing with Menedian is that he is kind of like with Bertucci. And I think there's maybe a case to be made for Menedian over Bertucci, but I think given what Bertucci has shown lately, I just kind of have him up there. But Menedian is kind of the same thing. He's a player that very, very like clean, smooth skater, very agile, gets the puck out of the zone. And even though he's not going to be a puck mover or a puck rusher or anything like that, sort of has that kind of the DNA of, your sort of your Joel Hanley's, who's doing quite well in Calgary,
He
and
really
kind
is.
of right, yeah. I mean, well, granted, Calgary is being fueled by Dustin Wolf, but still, like Joel Hanley playing like serious minutes, stick tap to that guy. But Benedian has that kind of game where he just makes those like simple plays, and he does it with something that I think is very essential for a defenseman in the modern day, which is good skating. I feel like good defenders need to have good skating in the modern NHL, and so offense I don't think is ever going to necessarily get there, but that's not what he's going to make what that's not going to be how he makes an NHL roster to begin with.
But one of the
And
things that
so
Sean and I talked about on the podcast, I asked about Menidian in the World Juniors, and he really didn't think he was too much of a factor. So what would you say to that when the competition got greater? And granted, the competition at Boston College is superb. I just mentioned that with Hockey East, but does that factor into any of your development equation?
Yes and no. I mean, like sometimes you see, for one, I agree with Sean. Like Menedian wasn't good in the World Juniors. However, he had a much better, like the last two games, I think he was quite good. So I think with these tournaments, it's not just about kind of the impression they left you with. It's also about kind of the tale of two halves, right? I mean, were they a player that started slow and ended awesome? Were they just always terrible? Were they always good? Were they consistent? Were they not? And so forth. And I think with these big tournaments, I think you can always give players a little leeway, just kind of based on the adjustment to a very different environment, a different format. Hemming was the same way. Terrible to start the World Juniors, was excellent. I think we had what 4 points in his last two games to end it, right? So I think I do think there are certain lessons to be kind of learned from how a player kind of plays in these big moments. But I don't think it affects sort of the bottom line of like, whether or not a player is projectable. I mean, you see plenty of like great prospects that don't have a great World Juniors that go on to have successful NHL careers, and so it's worth considering, but only to a certain degree.
You round out your top five with an Ivy Leaguer, George Figueres, sophomore at Cornell. And I think people have to understand that I just talked about Hockey East. There's also a high level of hockey in the Ivy League. And one of my favorite stories, and I've always tried to compare it, and I guess this is a good time to talk about it, is Ted Donato, who is from the Boston area, when talked about, I guess there was an anniversary of the Miracle on Ice. And I've told this story on Spits and Suds before, and he said that's not the greatest Miracle on Ice. Ted Donato played in the NHL, and they said, what do you mean that's not the greatest Miracle on Ice? He goes, the greatest Miracle on Ice is me graduating from Harvard. And that's not funny, David? That's a great story.
It's it's
All right, fine. Get back to George Figueres. Jeez. I mean, we're trying to provide some personality in this podcast, some laughs, yucks.
I don't think you're gonna find a whole lot of people that like wanted to hear about like Harvard. I think that's the thing.
All right. George Figueres, Cornell University. I believe he's a sophomore defenseman.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about your non-joke.
I might edit this out. If you hear this, Spits and Suds listeners, it's because I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm just leaving it in.
Yeah, well, you listen. You will leave it in. I think it's worth. We need to get the full Spittle experience for better and for worse. And I didn't think. By the way, I didn't think it was bad. It was just like it was a kind of very suburban dad sort of esque joke.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, is that an insult? I'm sorry.
No. I mean, it's fine. I'm not a dad, but thank you. By the way, David, are you going to go see the new pirate movie with your wife? Be careful. It's rated R.
You see what I mean? Like I was not even going to crack a smile, but your cheerful attitude is enough.
I did the podcast at 12:30 in the morning last night. What can I say? George Figueres, sophomore defenseman, Cornell. Good hockey.
Man, you were by yourself. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, people probably, but I mean, do fans really want to listen about like George Figueres?
Well, he's your top five prospect.
Okay, so one of the things that I want to make abundantly clear, and I feel like I'm pretty clear about this at the Substack, which is that listen, like Dallas doesn't have any tier one prospects. Zero, like there is no one on the Bischel, Bork, Stankoven, Wyatt Johnson tier, and I think that goes without saying. I think more or less people kind of recognize that, so that's worth keeping in mind. But Fagaris is a player that is somebody that I didn't really have on my radar really until recently. I think in part because, well, for one, I'm just one dude. I can only watch so much lower level hockey,
Yep.
and two, like usually what interests me in watching a lot of this is not just making sure I cover everything Dallas Stars, not just related but adjacent, and oftentimes that means, hey, like I'm more inspired to cover the Barrie Colts because they have three Dallas Stars prospects, right? Between Bertucci, Gardner, and Hemming. And there was just like nobody else on Cornell that was interested. And so he kind of fell by the wayside. But he's one of the rare puck rushers that Dallas has in the system who kind of plays that real throwback style, a good top speed, and is able to kind of really sort of command an offensive zone when he has the puck on his stick. Now, that's not to say that he's necessarily an offensive defenseman because you look at his point totals and nothing really stands out. But the effort and the profile is there, and that's why I have him top five. In part because, well, Stars prospect pool is very very thin, but also because I think he's an interesting player, and I think that's the case with a lot of Dallas's prospects. Sure, some of them are not NHL level, and will likely never crack an NHL roster spot. But just because that's not what I predict doesn't mean that the potential isn't there under the right, with the right development or with the right breaks. Because a lot of these players are interesting. I think Fagaris is a really great example of a player that is under the radar, but that has a skill set that Dallas can use, not just because he's a right shot defender and has like decent size at 6'2", but because like I think he has the skills. I mean, that's something that I feel like we've been asking for a long time. I mean, how many of us wanted Sean Walker last year in addition to Tanev? Um, a lot of people,
True.
right? It's if you define Heiskanen as a shutdown defender, then Thomas Harley is really your only puck mover. So it would kind of be nice to have another one, and Fagaris kind of really fits that bill as somebody with that potential.
So you do have, I'm going to jump the list, and at number 9, you have Matthew Semenoff, which is fascinating. He was the teammate of Logan Stankoven, drafted by the Stars with the Kamloops Blazers. This year he's played with both the Texas Stars and the Idaho Steelheads. Good year at Kamloops, but really playing fourth line minutes for the Texas Stars. Why don't you talk about Semenoff?
So one of the things I should also be clear about is that I only count people when it comes to prospects and prospect rankings. I'm only counting people that are below the age of 23. That's what most people in the industry do because, well, if it takes a person longer to develop, well, then that's usually a sign that they're just not going to ever make the NHL. So just want to be clear about that. Semenoff is only 21. So one of the reasons why he's in my top 10, in addition to the fact that like I didn't really want to cut off my list at like number 7 or something like that. So, but the thing about Semenoff is that I think there is still something there in terms of somebody that can finish plays, right? Somebody that's a quality shooter, has some passing chops, and he just like simply hasn't been given that opportunity in the AHL. And now that's not a criticism of like Neil Graham or anything like that. He's done a really great job. It always kind of like low key bothered me that they didn't try him next to Logan Stankoven, despite his history with him in the WHL. But it's hard to take Simonov's kind of lack of production seriously when he just isn't getting any minutes. And so despite that, I do think he has a little bit more potential than some of the other players that are a little bit older, and I could very easily see Semenoff developing into for example, like a Cameron Hughes or a Curtis McKenzie in terms of somebody that can really take the reins offensively. Because I still think he has a really solid shot, and I think that's kind of part of what it will allow him to be a bigger factor for the Texas Stars moving forward, if he's able to crack the top 6, for example. And so, yeah, no, I mean, the thing about Semenoff is that like his skating is just so bad. Like I don't. Luke Chilcote is going to need to do like some put in some overtime to turn Semenoff into, you know, maybe not like a good skater, but just like a better skater. Because that's the thing that's holding him back the most. And yes, sure, you can point to the Jason Robertsons of the world. Listen, like Jason Robertson is still not a great skater. Like he's improved enough that it's been allowed him to tap into all the other aspects of his game at an NHL pace, and that's huge. But that's huge for somebody with like true game breaking talent. Semenoff doesn't have that, but I do think if he improves his skating, like he's absolutely going to be a guy that you'll notice a lot more.
To end it, I know you didn't mention any goalies, but he is under 23 and he's fascinating. I will say, you have written about him in the past on your Substack, Star Stack, Arno Tiefensee, the German goaltender. Really, really good numbers this year, but kind of off the radar as far as being talked about because I wonder if he's going to come here. He's come here for camps, and I'm wondering maybe next year if he makes the jump and comes to North America.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know why I keep doing this. You're right. So he will turn 23 in May.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I do my prospect rankings next season, like he won't. Now I need to change that, right? Because goalies take longer to develop, and so yeah, obviously I haven't watched any games in the DEL, but his save percentage is .912, which is higher than last season. And the his team Adler Mannheim is a pretty solid team as well. In the DH, they got a decent record. So what he's doing at that age in a man's league is really impressive. And yeah, there's people should be talking about him more. Of course, they don't because like even people like me that try to follow this stuff just haven't had a chance to see him play. Outside of like some highlight packages.
Well, I think it is important to point out that the Stars do have a prospect goalie.
Yeah, well, and they have quite a few that I think are actually quite interested. There's the Maxim Morozov, the Russian goaltender, and then of course, you can even say like Remy Poirier in the AHL. Yeah, he's older, but they're they don't have necessarily a blue chip goalie prospect, but they do have some good depth guys. With the German goaltender being kind of the standout. I think people should be really excited about what he has potential to become. If he makes the NHL, because what he's already doing is, yeah, you're like, I should have put him on my list, but, and I'm going to do that from now on. Goalies will get a different age cutoff than skaters.
Sweet.
So thank you, Gavin, for riding the ship.
I'm glad I could contribute something. I didn't contribute laughs, but I contributed to David's future articles. So that's good. And, honestly, we don't have to worry about Stars goaltenders for at least another 2 years after this year with the Casey DeSmith 3-year signing. So, I mean, we talk about great Jim Nill signings, and DeSmith has been absolutely wonderful in year one. Let's see how year 2 and year 3. I mean, Alexander Radulov was awesome in year 1 as well. So, but I mean, you look at the Jim Nill signings and you look at this prospect pool and you just, there's a reason he's 2-time general manager of the year. And you look at the trades at the trade deadline and, whether it propels them, who knows? I'm like you, David. I said on the podcast last night, and this is not to be a hater, if it is Colorado and Colorado bounced Dallas in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. If Dallas bounced Colorado in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't view either as an upset. I just view two as two very good teams that unfortunately under this format have to play each other 1 through 8. I think they avoid each other in the first round. So we shall see, my friend.
Yeah, that is like, why is it that the two best teams in the West have to potentially play each other in the second round?
Yeah. Because the whole purpose of this playoff bracket was to build rivalries within the division. And I just don't think that has happened to the magnitude that they think that it has happened. And meanwhile, you have Colorado, say it is the 3 of them, Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg. So say you knock off Colorado, oh, congratulations, you now get Winnipeg. So Pretty fascinating. I mean, you got to get out of the Central, and that's really tough.
Okay, real quick, Gab.
Yeah.
All right, humor me. Can you name a rivalry that does not in the NHL that does not involve an original six team? I rest my case.
Yes, I can.
Oh, you can't. All right, who?
Yes. Calgary, Edmonton, Battle of Alberta.
Okay, all right. Fair enough. I was gonna say I thought you were gonna say Florida and Tampa. I'm like, well, okay, all right. So
Yeah.
we've slowly gotten there.
Yeah.
But
I understand what
but
you're saying. I think it's a great point. I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think Anaheim and LA can be a good rival at times too. But I mean, yeah, you're right. It's those rivalries, maybe minus the Battle of Alberta, are good. Another one, even though like we don't talk about it because we think Minnesota is our rival in Dallas, but Stars fans, guess what? Winnipeg is the massive rival of Minnesota. Those two teams hate each other. And when they go at it, they drop the mitts. That is a bitter rivalry that not a lot of people talk about. But you're right. Really, it comes down to original six.
who is Dallas's rival?
They don't have one.
I would say Vegas. I would say we're, especially with the Mark Stone stuff and
Yeah,
Heiskanen,
it has the
like the
makings.
amount of hate.
Right. But this is my issue is it needs to continue because a few years back with the Winter Classic, knocking them out of the playoffs, I'd say Nashville would have been that at the time. And then it shifts to Minnesota, who we seem to play every year in the playoffs. And you're right. Now it's Vegas based on the Mark Stone situation and now the Miro Heiskanen situation. So, I think they have their rivals, but I think honestly, it's not necessarily the Stars' fault as much as it is geography.
Yeah, I mean, but see, that's why like I don't care for this like sort of manufactured rivalry crap, which is that I just want to see the best teams play the best teams,
Yeah,
and I don't want to see like the best teams have to sort of jump like walk on hot coals and go through one of those like stupid jigsaw traps from those Saw movies just to get to the top or just to get to the Western Conference
right.
Finals. And this is not just like a Dallas Star. Oh, the homers complaining about, dude, look at the Atlantic. You know, it's possible. I don't think it's going to happen, but you could very easily end up in a scenario, given their injuries, with Florida and Tampa in the first round. Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I'm hoping it's Toronto having to play one of either Florida or Tampa because I love watching Toronto get bounced out in the first round. But I mean, that's just so obnoxiously like just dumb. Florida and Tampa in the first round, like you cannot be a
Right.
serious league and have that happen.
Yeah. I actually have Toronto going far this year. I'm gonna
You
I'm
know,
gonna
man,
go against the grain, and I could be wrong because they have proven to me, you, and everyone else that not happening. But I love the coach. I love the makeup. I think they're tougher. I think they're built for playoff hockey. I like their trade acquisitions at the deadline. So I do have Toronto doing some damage. But you're right. Any team in that division can bounce the other team. And I guess that's what makes hockey good, but I do think there is a fairness there because once again, the purpose was not necessarily to bounce good teams. The purpose was division rivalries, and I just don't think that has really transformed like the NHL wants it to.
I'm struggling to figure out how it is we get along. Because I disagree with you on everything that you just said about Toronto, except believe it or not, except the part about yeah, I do like I agree with you. I do think it's very easy to get caught up in this like kind of supernatural thinking, like, oh well, Toronto is cursed and they're always going to get bounced out of the first round. You always say that until it actually happens.
Yeah,
The only thing though, I think the only thing is that like, well, Austin Matthews is clearly not playing 100%, and I think that's a big part of why normally I would agree with you. If Austin Matthews were 100%, yes, I think they can go far. I think I think it's as much as I dislike the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm never going to deny reality and say like, oh, this is not a much better team than what they're given credit for simply because they tend to be the butt of the playoff joke. Sure, like I said, that's great. I love seeing it. However, they are a really good team. And again, I just go back to like, well, if whatever Austin Matthews is playing through, and I don't know why he's playing through it, but that's just always going to be a factor in against him. In addition to the fact that like I actually don't like the blue line, just because Simon Benoit can throw 100 fake Superman punches in the world. That's not going to impress me. And it did also because that's not even a proper Superman punch. You don't jump to do a Superman punch. Haven't you watched the UFC?
Ah, got it.
You have to conceal the jab. It works in a straight line, and not arc. I mean, this is just it's like Bane's like stupid spinning back punch versus Batman in the Dark Knight. I hated that move so much.
Well,
you see what you got us doing, Gavin?
No, I understand. We disagree on a lot. We disagree on Michael Kesselring. We disagree on.
We agree on that. What are you talking about?
I don't know about that. When I brought up Michael Kesselring, I brought up Michael Bunting in a trade one day, and I was laughed at. Bring up Utah, I'm laughed at, but it's okay.
Listen, like I appreciate all this. It's just when you tell me some Harvard joke that then we have beef.
That's why when people leave reviews on Spits and Suds, they say, I love the guests because you guys are the best. And you are a Spits and Suds bestie, my friend. So, all right, before we let you go, at David Castillo, awesome to meet one of our Stars fans, David, who told me, he's like, I subscribe to David Castillo's Substack at Starstack. That fires me up because I think, that's wonderful. GG also subscribed, and, you're helping David, who helps us on the podcast, and that is absolutely awesome. Want to throw in my plugs for Robert Tiffin as well as Sean Shapiro on that. But you do have an upcoming D Magazine article out. Once again, let's plug that for you.
Yeah, it was published this morning, and it's just kind of all about the news about like Pete DeBoer made that comment, hey, we may have to win a round without Heiskanen, and so I just kind of like I ran with that. I was like, well, can they, given what the kind of patterns that we're seeing defensively? So you can check that out at D Magazine now. Of course, I also kind of talked about I did some analysis yesterday at the Substack on how Dallas matches up with the Pacific by the numbers, which is to say extremely well. Edmonton is not the team they were last year, and I mean that as a negative. And so yeah, a lot of stuff. Substack, and I feel like there was something else I was going to plug.
Yeah, just an all-around good dude.
Yeah, well, Gavin Spittle is an all-around good dude. David Castillo sucks.
I don't feel as though people think that. In fact, you were shocked when a couple of Stars fans mentioned you and they knew about you. So there you go, David. You're a popular guy. So for David Castillo, boy, we got a lot in today. We talked about the Stars last night. We gave you some prospects that maybe you haven't heard of and what David likes about them. We talked about the NHL playoffs and how they do it. We just had so much, including some bad Gavin Spittle dad jokes, but that's what Spits and Suds is about, people. We just let it flow. We let it rip. What comes up. But the best part is we together are growing this great game of hockey in DFW. A couple things. We'll have more Spits and Suds programs this week. Next week, really excited. Allison Simpson of the New York Sirens of the PWHL. We talked to Hannah Bilka earlier in the year. Allison Simpson is the other DFW native from Frisco. She is in the PWHL, her first year coming out of Colgate. We'll talk about her career coming through DFW. So super excited to talk to Allison next week. We have more guests to come right here on Spits and Suds. Thank you once again for supporting and listening to Spits and Suds. Until our next podcast, have a great day, everyone.